Welcome to the Matt Phillips Podcast. I am Matt Phillips, your sales leadership coach, mental toughness expert, and founder of Matt Phillips Coaching. We help sales managers and leaders make more money, save time, and become kick-ass leaders of their sales teams. And that's what we're here to talk about on this podcast. We are here to give you the tools and tactics to build a well-oiled sales machine and teach you the mental toughness skills so you can show up confident, focused, emotionally in control, and ready to energize your team. It's time to talk sales leadership and mental toughness. Let's get into today's episode. Hey, everybody, it is Matt. Welcome to today's podcast episode. And today I want to focus on the word exposure, right? And when I talk about exposure, it's about getting out there in the world. It's making known like this is who I am and what I do and what we offer and how we can help you. And obviously heavily focused from a sales perspective, right? So I don't know if you're an individual contributor in sales. I don't know if you're running a sales team. Maybe you're outside of sales. This still applies of getting exposure for our business to grow revenue and get our return to the highest possible level. But one thing I found in my business and in working with hundreds of sales leaders across the United States is that you have to be very, very careful of where you're seeking exposure, who you're seeking it with, and when you are seeking that. And if you're not careful, it can truly hinder your business. It can hold you back. And that's why I want to dive into this topic today, because we have to have a different focus, a different mentality around gaining exposure for our business. Because I'm telling you right now, I have personally wasted so much time in my life. And I see sales leaders do it all the time with their salespeople of wasting time where there's no return on investment. That's why this is so important. Now, I'm sure you can think of hundreds of ways that you can gain exposure. You're probably doing a lot, right? Maybe you're doing lunch and learns with companies. Maybe you're going to all these association events. You're getting booths and these huge displays. Yeah, maybe you are obviously sending emails and making phone calls and networking groups. I mean, there's hundreds of ways to gain exposure. Right? I look at my business. We send out emails. We have a huge social media presence on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram. We have this podcast. This is a way we gain exposure and get the word out about who we are and what we do. Right? There's so many different avenues that even we take in our business. But again, one thing I've learned is that sometimes what we think is a great way isn't the ideal way. It's not the way that gives us the biggest bang for our buck, right? That's going to make us set us up where we have the biggest impact possible, which in sales translates to revenue and translates to commission. So we have to be very, very diligent and very, very careful. And I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had over the past couple of weeks with all the sales leaders that I work with on this exact topic. You know, when I think back to my business, and I could tell you lots of stories about ways I've tried to get exposure that, some worked, a lot did not. And that's why I'm hyper focused on this in my business. And that's why my wife, she's the CEO of my business, if you didn't know that, Shannon, and that's why she's also hyper focused on it as well. Now, when I look back early in my business, so I've had the Matt Phillips coaching for over 11 years now, which is incredible. And early on, I mean, you're just trying to get in front of anybody and everybody, right? So it's like when you start your sales career, you're just trying to get somebody to listen. And so early on, I would go do speeches at literally for a cup of coffee. It was all free. I guess maybe a dollar coffee that I would get out of it. But I'd go to these Rotary clubs and I'd go to all these different places just to, again, get exposure. And part of it was not only to open doors, but it was also to practice my craft, right? So I knew I was there and doing it, but it was just building this momentum. And I remember in particular, I would go to these co-working spaces and they'd have these little networking events, right? So all the people from the co-working space, all these different businesses would come and there were all sorts of different people there, right? Just talking about their businesses, things like that. And I'd always get asked to have a booth. And it was basically a table, right? And so I put all this effort into it. I got this huge banner design and it looked really, really cool. And got some freebie stuff, some flyers made to hand out to people. And I was super excited for it. And so that day of the event happened. It was about 3 hours long. So I stood at the booth. All sorts of people came by and I'm talking, exchanging cards, doing all that stuff. And I got home and was telling Shannon about it. She's, how to go. And I said, I met all these great people, got all these business cards, things like that. I'm going to follow up with them, do that stuff. And I did. I followed up with them. Then a couple months later, another co-working space had an event, and I got a booth again, or my table, I should say. Wasn't that extravagant. And set up, and I got home, and she's like, how'd it go? And I said, I met all these great people and got these cards and things like that. And a couple months goes by, and then I have this other opportunity to get another table. And I do that, and I come home, and Shannon asked me the same question. Then she asked me the third time a very key question. She said, Matt, how much revenue have you gotten from these past 3 events that you've been to? Now, I got to tell you, my ego was a little hurt right there, because I'm like, oh my gosh, like, does she not trust me? No, she trusts me. But here's the reality. I knew the answer, and the answer was 0. No revenue. Great talks, great exchange of business cards, but 0 revenue. And when you're running a business, when you're in a sales role, like, you got to bring in money, right? That's what keeps things alive, right? We're building the runway, and then eventually the airplane takes off. But we have to be getting revenue to continue to pour the cement to build the runway. And I knew right then and there that this exposure I was trying to create wasn't working all so well. I've never been back and had a table at an association or co-working space since. Because when I analyzed it, it was not a good return of my time or return of my investment. And here's the deal on time, right? If you haven't listened to the podcast, we'll link it in the show notes too, where I talk about ROI and ROT, return on time. And it's a critical concept you have to understand. But with every bit of exposure that we try to create, it takes time. So for me, going to these co-working spaces or these association events, a lot of them were at night. So from 5 in the evening till 8 in the evening. Well, there's a sacrifice that comes with everything. And for me, I wasn't spending time with my wife and kids. Now, that could have been a great use of time, but right then and there, I knew it was not. Because even Shannon said, she's like, you're at these events, you're getting nothing from it from a revenue perspective, and you're not home. Like, I'd rather have you home and find a different way. And that's an important thing as leaders within organizations, is this analysis of when we're reaching out to the market to gain that exposure, it's analyzing where are we actually getting it. What's the biggest bang for our buck? What's the return on our time and return on investment? We have to have this diligence around it. So for me, going to these events and having a booth, not a good use of time. I even talked with one of my clients just last week. We were talking about this exact topic, and this company sponsors a ton of these different association events, which is awesome. It's incredible, right? It's keeping the association alive and the industry thriving. But I asked him, I said, you stand around literally for 2 days straight, some days, in front of this booth talking to people. I'm like, do you see a good return on investment? Like, do you see revenue and contracts being signed out of standing in front of the booths? And for this particular individual, the answer was, well, actually, no. He said, the biggest benefit I see is a lot of these association events have these speed dating things. I said, maybe it's a new thing, I don't know, but they have these speed dating things where you basically sign up and say, well, I'm a vendor. And then you have your kind of ideal client say, yep, I'm interested in hearing something about that. And you get like 3 minutes with each other where you get to give your pitch. He said that I can tie directly back to contracts being signed and revenue. So I was challenging him to you have to rethink then where you're spending your time, right? Could you have someone else stand at the booth for those 2 days instead of you? And you spend your time doing more speed dating, more meetings, because that's the exposure that's going to get you where you want to go. So again, in my business, lots of different ways, right? This podcast is a way to get exposure, correct? You're listening. I'm so happy that you're listening. Behind the scenes, though, you have to understand that we're constantly analyzing, because we want to see, is there a correlation between what we're doing and the time we're spending producing this podcast to revenue that we get, right? Or people that we can help. Because we have a huge mission at Matt Phillips Coaching that we want to help millions of people around the world, right? Become better sales leaders, become better husbands and fathers and mothers. And we want to help people progress in their lives. In order to do that, we have to make sure we're using our time well. And this podcast so far has been a great tool to gain that exposure. But don't be fooled. We are constantly analyzing it behind the scenes, because if at some point we realize, man, this is just not, it's not a good use of time, then the podcast will not exist. Now, it's not happening, but it's something we constantly think about. So for me in my business, I'm in sales just like you, right? We're trying to figure out, is the emails we're sending, the social media platforms we on, or if we post this or post that or do the podcast or do these events, is this a good use of time? And I can't tell you, even, I get asked a lot to do speeches and they'll say, well, it's going to be amazing exposure. You're going to get in front of all these, human resources people or sales people, and it's going to be amazing exposure. And so early on in my business, I'd be like, oh my gosh, yes, like what an opportunity. This is incredible, all this sort of stuff. But I become more picky over the years. And I ask deeper questions to make sure, is my ideal client literally sitting in the room? What other opportunities am I going to have to interact with those people? And if the right answers come, then I might do it. I mean, you'd be shocked when you go to these events that you go to and you hear all these speakers come up, right? Whether it's a breakout session or on the main stage, you'd be shocked at how many of those are actually doing it for free to get exposure. Well, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But that's why I've learned over the years, I don't say yes to everything. I say yes to the right things, if I'm going to do it for free, which is pretty darn rare these days. So this is something to keep in mind. So the biggest takeaway I want from you from this podcast episode today is to really take a step back and think about where you're spending your time, where you're spending your money to gain this exposure, right? To tell people who you are, what you're about, how you can help, and make those real connections and build relationships. But really take a step back and figure out, where do you happen to be wasting your time? And where are certain areas where you're seeing that return, but you're not maximizing that return, right? Maybe you need to double down in an area. Maybe if you saw great return from doing lunch and learn at a company, that it's time to do a few more lunch and learns, because you're seeing that exposure grow exponentially, or those relationships get formed much, much stronger in that environment. I want you to take a step back and analyze it. Exposure for exposure's sake is not going to help you grow your business, grow your revenue, make your team more successful. And all these questions I'm asking you, I hope you go back and you're actually asking your teammates where they're spending their time, and you're challenging them. And they might not like it. Just like when Shannon asked me if I had received any revenue from those 3 events I went to, my ego was a little hurt. And they might feel hurt. You might be feeling hurt right now. Like, man, no, I feel like I'm spending time in the right places. I just want you to take a look deeper, because I know the possibility that is inside you. I know the possibility that is out there in this world. And in order to do that, we have to look inside, set our egos to the side just for a bit, and ask the right questions. That's going to help accelerate us towards those goals that I know I have, and I know you have as well. So no more exposure for exposure's sake. It's going to be intentional. It's going to be built around the great answers to the great questions that we ask. And we're going to test it, and we're going to track it, and we're going to monitor it, and we're going to be willing to make the tough decisions. When we get to that point, we realize there is no correlation. We're going to make that decision, because there's something bigger, something better to reach the people that you want to reach. All right. With that, I hope you have a fabulous day. Thank you again for being on the podcast with me today. One last thing before you go, please be on the lookout. And we're going to probably do a special podcast episode about this as well, and do some extra posts that you might start seeing. But on, September 13th, that Wednesday, we are launching call it 2.0, right, of our sales manager leadership program. And I'm so excited about this, because has been built by sales managers for sales managers. And it's about elevating yourself as a leader. It's about making sure you're getting the most out of your team. You know how to motivate each of them, and make sure you take this kind of holistic look at your life too, that it's kind of that professional and personal development. So be on the lookout for that, because it's a game changer for the people who've been through it. And I know it will be for you as well. So we're getting pretty pumped up and fired up. We're going to launch this free webinar training that you can take advantage of to get a glimpse into kind of our methodology and how we work and how we think here at Matt Phillips Coaching. and so excited for that. So be on the lookout for that. Keep gaining that exposure, the right exposure at the right time with the right people, and have a great rest of your day. We'll see you on the next podcast. Thank you for joining us today on the Matt Phillips Podcast. If you are like us, we know that you are here to do great things, to become the sales leader that makes things happen and drives big time sales results. We know you have that big vision, and we are here to help get you where you want to go. We're here to help you develop that unstoppable, rock solid leadership skill set and help you train to master the one true differentiator: mental toughness. We would love to be part of your journey. So if you are ready, head over to mattphillipscoaching.com and check out the ways that we can help. As always, please share this episode and make sure you subscribe by clicking the button below. Thank you again. And now, go crush the day.